I basically went to university by mistake. I found myself in a business studies lecture thinking, why on earth did I ever think I would be interested in business studies? Why? Why would I be? And so instead of thinking of another topic, I just thought, no, let's just try and find some adventure. So a couple of friends of mine had gone sort of fruit picking, backpacking around Europe, just finding jobs as they went. And I thought maybe I'll do that. Yeah. But then I saw an advertisement in my local newspaper for police, and I thought, well, maybe I should apply for that. Wow. And so I couldn't make my mind up, so I flipped a coin. Then he opened the door and put a samurai sword to my throat. And he was like showing us really angry, really blood red face, and he was saying, "You're a fucking drug squad. You're a fucking drug squad. You're 5-0, man. I'm going to kill you." I just whimpered like, "I don't mean to hassle you, man." As an undercover officer, you're not an actor. They can repeat the same act on a play, or they can maintain a certain act for, to develop a film or whatever. We don't have those skills. It's different skills entirely. So what we have to be is a different version of ourselves. If you try and pretend to be someone that you're not for a prolonged period of time in pressure situations, then the cracks can show.
Yeah, as I've mentioned, I'm so glad that, we finally made the conversation happen. I was, and I am very excited to talk to you about the variety of very, experiences that you have that I think most of the people associate just with action movies and, with books and fiction in general. So, as a start, how do you, when it comes to, let's say you meet a new person, how do you describe yourself? How do you present yourself to a person who doesn't know anything about you?
That I'm a full-time activist. That's how I identify myself. That's how I see myself. A full-time activist. If people want to know more, well, I'm a writer, public speaker, former police officer, drug policy activist. I also do some work in the climate space as well, but principally I'm a drug policy activist. Sometimes, depending on what publication I'm quoted in, I'm sometimes quoted as an international drug policy expert. But it just depends how you want to frame it. But essentially, I'm an activist, political activist.
Yeah. I think that's a, very efficient summary of all the different activities I guess you sort of simultaneously undertake. Let's get back into the past a bit. I'm very curious to hear, in a sort of obviously summarized way, what was your path to achieving and getting involved in all of these different roles that you've mentioned? Because it does seem as quite the journey, Yeah,
it is the journey. Well, in a summarized way, let me think. Well, I went into the police probably too young. I didn't realize how young I was until I was in the police at 19 years old. I realized how sheltered I'd been. I was really terrible at uniform policing. I wasn't very good at it, but I managed to survive for a few years, and then got an attachment to the drug squad. And just because of being in the right place at the right time, I was tried out for some undercover work, and I ended up, and that really changed the shape of the rest of my life, because I ended up working all over England, working undercover on drugs operations. From as far north as Leeds, as far south as Brighton, and lots of other places in between, spending 6 or 7 months at a time, essentially infiltrating urban street dealing gangs and gathering evidence of conspiracy. So I went from that, but the thing is, when I started that work, I was naive to the reality of why people use drugs problematically. So at the beginning of that work, I saw problematic drug users as prey, people that I would manipulate and use to get to get them to introduce me further up the ladder and introduce me to the regional drug dealers. So I used them and manipulated them without really much care about what the impact was on them. The fact that meeting me was going to be the worst experience of their life because they'd end up doing prison time, essentially. But I spent a lot of time justifying what I was doing to myself because I believed that the end justified the means, that as a result of this operation I would be catching the bad guy, putting them in prison. And to some extent that is true, but what I hadn't realised is that the system, those bad guys, those bad people, or that had become who they are because of policy. They only those drug dealers who have to be violent to protect their territory or intimidate informants or intimidate witnesses. They only exist because of prohibition. So policies created this situation, and I was sort of superheating it by the work I was doing, constantly making it more violent, constantly making it worse. Because for every time you get a gang out of the way or a kingpin character out of the way, there's always violence afterwards, because of the gap you've created in the market, and the size of the market stays the same. So, after many, many years of pushing my doubts to one side, I had to finally face up to the fact that nothing I was doing had any positive benefit, and all I was doing was causing harm to vulnerable individuals, but also causing harm to society, because I was perpetually making it more dangerous. And that's what drugs policing does because of prohibition. Now, I had to go through a bit of a mental breakdown in order to come out the other side, because and I'm diagnosed with chronic complex PTSD, but I also have moral injury. And moral injury is because like I've just said, I kept pushing it to one side. I kept thinking the end justifies the means, but the reality is I contravened my own ethical and moral centre by causing harm to vulnerable people. And so that forms a really messy mixture with complex PTSD, I can tell you. So I had to go through work, realising that I had a mental health crisis, and then out the other side, I realised that I had to be active. I had to do something positive. And that's why, there's probably some neurodiversity thrown in there as well. The neurodivergent are more susceptible to PTSD. We know that statistically, but I'm one of those people that I'm so geeky that if I get obsessed with something, I have to know everything about it. And there'll be lots of people listening who recognise that, either in themselves or other people. But it means that, I read every paper that comes out. I study the subject matter. I've written on it, and even within policing, I was a drugs expert. So now I use my experience and the knowledge that I'm constantly developing to try and persuade different audiences in different places as to the folly and extreme danger of our current drug policy.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So there are so many things I want to double down on. I guess it would make sense to start chronologically. First, I'm really interested. What was your thought dynamic when deciding to go into police? As a young person. And I already assume it would be an interesting response. And the other thing is that now retrospectively you describe yourself as being naive at this point of time, and I'm curious to hear why is that exactly.
Yeah, sure. So I was not one of those children who would run around with a plastic policeman's helmet on, always wanting to be a police officer. Far, far from it. It was never on my radar at all. But I basically went to university by mistake. And what I mean by that is I found myself in a business studies lecture thinking, why on earth did I ever think I would be interested in business studies? Why? Why would I be? And so instead of thinking of another topic, I just thought, let's just try and find some adventure. So a couple of friends of mine had gone sort of fruit picking, backpacking around Europe, just finding jobs as they went. And I thought maybe I'll do that. Yeah. But then I saw an advertisement in my local newspaper for police, and I thought, well, maybe I should apply for that. Because that would be different, right? Yeah. And so I couldn't make my mind up, so I flipped a coin. And it came up heads, so I applied for the police. Wow. So no ambition at all. And by being naive, I mean, I read a lot. I was a geeky kid. Yeah. I read a lot of historical fiction, science fantasy. So, I was quite an escapist type of guy. I played Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. I wasn't that sporty kid. I was into music and fantasy. Yeah. So I wasn't the normal type, perhaps, to go into policing. But when I was in the police, I sort of had this idea, because my father had always taught me that you should always try and reason with anybody. And if you get violent, then you've lost an argument. Ooh. That was my upbringing. Yeah. It was all about being able to debate and being able to win people over. And then, of course, I found that doesn't work with a lot of people, and that on a Friday night in the city of Derby, you can try and reason with someone all you like, but they'll still keep punching you. And it was a bit of a shock to me that and I realised that I'd been really sheltered. I'd never been punched, and so I had to get used to that to that side of it. In fact, a fellow recruit who was a boxing instructor, I got him to teach me some boxing. Not so much for me to learn how to punch, but rather get used to being punched. Just so that fear went. You know what I mean? And just to try and grow up a little bit quicker. I was naive, and I had been sheltered because I'd sheltered myself.
Yeah. And what would you say was the moment, if you have any sort of memories about that, when you met this reality that you haven't, experienced before, and you were like, wow, this is something that I haven't thought about. This is something completely new, and, I'm in shock.
Yeah, there was lots of things, to be honest. One of my first days out on patrol on my own, and in fact, my being allowed to be out on my own was delayed because I wasn't very good. Oh, wow. But when I was eventually allowed out on my own, I went to this house, a domestic dispute. And it was a guy that I knew because my tutor and I had arrested him for disqualified driving a few weeks before. Wow. And I got to this domestic dispute in Derby, and I don't know where the wife was, but as soon as I went into this room, and all that was in this room was a TV against the wall and one big sofa in the centre of the room. That's all that was in the room. Wow. And this guy had this Stanley knife, and he slashed his wrist and then sort of scratched at the other one and then said, "You're next," essentially, and started chasing me around this sofa. So I'm running around this sofa, and you ever play a game as a kid where you chase each other, like you chase each other around a car, and someone runs a bit that way and someone runs a bit that way. It was a bit like that, and it took me much longer than it should have done to remember that I had a radio and that I can ask for some help, and then remember that I had a truncheon in my pocket as well. So I got my truncheon out and faced him off with this stick and radioed for help. And I realised, I just front him up. But he actually backed down a bit because I had the stick in my hand. Yeah. But I had to, So I was just slow at learning. Yeah. I was not quick to learn at the job at all. Yeah.
And when you were, confronted with the idea that at some point, this moment where you need to get into reality and you need to get into action, you were aware of that moment. How did you feel about that in terms of, from the mindset perspective? Did you fear that moment? Were you expecting it? Were you excited about it? Were you anxious about it? Like, how would you describe the emotions and how did you deal with them?
I was just frustrated with myself at not learning as fast as my peers. if I'm honest. And I had more of a fear of failure than anything else. And I hated it. I hated the job. And I just thought, I can't wait to do something else. But I wouldn't let myself walk away until I'd proved myself I'd done it. So I had to get through my probationary period. And all of the time I was thinking, I'm going to get through my probationary period, then I can leave, because I'll prove it to myself that I can do it, right? And so that was me. It was just surviving. But I got past my probation. I stayed in for another couple of years, just improving finally. And then I got an attachment to the drug squad. And then everything changed.
Wow. And what made you change your decision going through that period in terms of, not going with your initial reaction to leave police and do something else, but rather continue? Was there a moment where you were like, well, I actually like that, I'm actually good at that, I might as well continue with it?
Well, I moved stations, and so after about 3.5 years, I moved stations, and that made it a lot easier. Because the problem is, when you're not very good at something in a team environment, you get the reputation of not being good at something, which makes it much harder to improve. Because if you get the feeling that your colleagues don't trust you, they don't trust you to back them up, they just dismiss you as being useless, it's much, much harder to actually develop, much harder. So when I changed stations, it was like I had a blank slate. No one knew who I was. And so I was treated equally, which made it much easier for me to learn. And so I did much better. Suddenly got an attachment to the drug squad because I'd done better, and it just changed like that, really.
What a great
I still thought I was going to leave. Yeah. But I just kept, just a bit longer, because I didn't know what to do either. What am I going to do after this?
What a great example of how important environment is to people. At some point, you are unmotivated, underperforming, and at the other, the next moment when you're like, between the right people and everything changes. That's such an interesting concept. Wow.
It is. I mean, it's a lesson for anybody, isn't it? Try and be patient with people, right? But if someone's struggling, they need support, and if you support them, they'll improve quicker. It's a basic lesson for anyone. Unfortunately, certainly at that time, policing was harsh. There was no patience with anybody, because you've got to rely on people to back you up. You've got to. So it's an extra harsh environment to those people who are seen as weak.
I can only understand, and I think the point that you're making here is such an interesting thing that at least I haven't really thought about that. I mean, the social aspect of the police force and how it affects your performance, which is, very logical, but it's not really, in front of people's eyes and faces when you're speaking about that. Wow. Yeah. So you move stations, and how's the transition working between you being into a more of a conventional police role to moving to a drug squad and sort of prolifying yourself in such a role?
Well, the reason that I got an attachment is because there was something interesting happening at drug policy in the time in the UK. For years, the tabloid newspapers had been terrifying the British public about the crack cocaine epidemic in the USA. And there have been lots of sort of lurid, quite often racist stories in the Sunday Mail about black people trading in crack cocaine. And so by the time we actually did get crack hitting in the early 90s, there was already fear. So there was a feedback loop. And this is what happens sometimes in drug policy, like a moral panic. There's a feedback loop because the public are told to be scared. And then if something happens, the public tell the politicians they're scared. It's a feedback loop between the press, the public and politicians, sometimes amplified by police. So what happened was that the Home Office directed all of the police to prioritise heroin and crack cocaine policing above everything else, above domestic violence, above terrorism, above anything. It was the number one priority. They increased the funding massively for that and demanded results. So that's where I stepped in, because what the approach in Derbyshire was to get young cops attached to the drug squad so they could learn how to catch people and spread the expertise, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just that moment in time, that political moment in time. So I only had a month's attachment, just to learn a few things. But one of them looked at me and said, "You fancy having a go at buying some crack?" And I thought, well, I hadn't really considered that, but yeah, go on then. Yeah. And so hastily they put this obs point up, a camera, and they gave me a £20 note, pointed me to this terrace door, and I went and knocked on this door. This huge guy answered and says, "What do you want?" And he looked at me, he said, "You're not a student, are you?" I fucking hate students. And at that moment I thought, actually, I don't know who I am, because I didn't realise I'd need a cover story. I thought I'd just come and buy it from you.
Oh.
And so I thought, that'll do. "Yeah, I'm a student." And he says, "Are you stupid? I've just told you I hate students." But then he laughed, and then he became quite friendly then, and we had a bit of crack, and I paid him £20. He let me choose which wrap I was having, and as I walked away, he said, "Hey, you take care now. Don't get yourself arrested." Which I thought was really quite considerate, really.
It is.
But the point, I suppose, the important point is that this was actually a very new tactic from British police, very new, like brand new. I'm not saying I invented undercover work, because undercover work had been going on for years, but undercover work was pitched at a higher level with a well-worked-out legend and lots of resources behind it. This idea of going at the street level and being undercover at a lower level and working your way up, this was new, completely new. So that guy who answered the door, he didn't know there might be a cop on his doorstep. He didn't know, because they didn't do that. Wow. But of course, he went to prison, and then he told everybody else, and in no time at all, everyone knew there was a new tactic. Now, the drug squad loved me at that then. They thought, oh, great, we can get loads of results using this guy. And so I learnt very, very quickly and developed very quickly. But it went from a few days operation to a few weeks, and in no time at all, I was being loaned out to all of the other drug squads, doing no less than 6 or 7 months at a time. Wow. And because it got more difficult, I had to become much more sophisticated in my legend building, my management of my legend, the management of lies, and I was just learning as I went, really. But this kind of work clearly suited my personality much more than uniform team-based policing, significantly more, because I wasn't following orders. I was just out there doing what I wanted to do, essentially, just bringing back the goods. So I think that suits my personality and maybe my neurodivergence as well.
Wow. Yeah. That's so interesting, and how would you, describe this first experience, or one of the first experiences that you've had in this role, in terms of in terms of your mental perception on that? Was it satisfying? Was it thrilling? What did you like in that made you interested, or made you want to continue in this role?
Well, I did feel the fear, obviously, but I also really enjoyed. What I really enjoyed is the fact that I was quickly developing.
Yeah.
I was learning very, very rapidly and accelerating that learning. Now, we all like to feel that we're developing, right? Yeah. This is one of the fundamental aspects of what we do as work, or how we identify. And I was getting good at this very, very quick, and that's a thrilling thing. I loved the intellectual challenge of maintaining the lie and manipulating people. Maybe there's a little bit of psychopathy in there somewhere. But I enjoyed that. I got a thrill out of that, that sort of control aspect of it. But also, I was a young man, and I enjoyed the respect of my peers, which I hadn't really had before. So for example, I did an operation in Stoke, in Fenton, in Stoke-on-Trent, and I'd been buying heroin off this dealer for a long time. Well, for certainly weeks. And I thought he was fine with me, I thought we'd got a good relationship. I was buying increasing weights off him. Anyway, I knocked on this door, one of the addresses he used, and he opened the door and put a samurai sword to my throat. And he was like showing us really angry, really blood red face, and he was saying, "You're a fucking drug squad. You're a fucking drug squad. You're 5-0, man. I'm going to kill you." And I just whimpered like, "I don't mean to hassle you, man." Anyway, as he's shouting and this saliva's hitting me from this angry face, I heard this woman from behind him pop her head out from behind him, and she said, "I thought he was going to say he was then." And then the two of them started laughing. It's like they decided to wind me up or something.
Wow.
Or maybe he just had a new sword and wanted to try it out. Or more likely, he just wanted to remind me who was boss, because a lot of urban dealers, they develop this reputation so they don't get grassed up, because if you're scared of them, you're less likely to pass their name onto the police, right? So it's part of the game. But the thing is, I really genuinely thought I was about to die.
Wow.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
Because I knew his character, I knew his reputation. He was a nasty piece of work. So anyway, I haggled with him. I bought 4 bags of heroin. I put in a cigarette packet as I was walking away, and I looked up, and someone then tried to rob me for the heroin I'd just bought, and they were sticking a knife towards my stomach.
Jesus.
So talk about frying pan and fire. But I said to this guy, after what I've been through for this, mate, you're not having it. And I started sort of running backwards, and I ran too fast for him. And you know what he said as I was getting away from him? He says, "Oh, no, hang on, just come here a minute." And I said, "No, come here a minute so I can rob you." Yeah. So anyway, I went to the secret location. Obviously, handed in my exhibits, started writing my evidence, did the debrief, told him what had happened, and so you can probably hear my cat there.
That's right.
But as I was talking to people and I was explaining what had happened, they're all their jaws are open, they're looking at me, and one of them says, "Well, you just look like you've just been to buy a newspaper, not heroin." And because I just felt completely relaxed. Yeah. And so it occurred to me that, wow, so I'm one of those people who can have near-death experiences, and I'm fine. And actually what I found was that at those times of really high stress, I actually had the sense that time slowed down, and I had all the time in the world to think about it, and I would be fine because I could think my way out of it. Of course, I didn't realise at the time that this is probably one of the things that made me susceptible to post-traumatic stress disorder, because I was just burying it. But at the time, it was exhilarating, right? And I was a young man, and it boosts your ego. Yeah. For colleagues to say, "Wow, you're tough," right? It boosts the ego. I was in my early 20s. I was only 23. Wow. So, or 25 or something like that when that happened. Yeah. So that was some of the things I enjoyed.
Wow. Okay, so I guess this is a good segue to, I guess, a topic that you've been asked a million times. But before moving further, do you have any more of these sort of situations that you feared for your life, and that maybe in some capacity, and I guess we'll discuss that later into the conversation, but in some capacity really shaped you as a person,
I mean, we haven't. How long have we got? We haven't got that. It's not that long a podcast, is it? Because I mean, I've got loads of them. I've got a book. My first book, Good Cop, Bad War, has got lots of the stories in, but even then, my co-writer removed a lot of them just to trim down the book. So, just so many. I have no idea how many times I've thought I was going to die. I've got no idea. Honestly, I suppose one of the things that really shaped me as a person, though, and I suppose, because it's an interesting way of phrasing it, I'm not quite sure anyone's asked me in those exact terms, really. So it's not exactly a scary story, but in Northampton, one of the later jobs I did, it was an investigation into the Burger Bar Boys, which are a very notorious gang from Birmingham. People can Google them, look them up. One of the days I was trying to find a new route into one of their runners. So I'd already got loads of evidence against some of the Burger Bar Boys, but I needed a new route to try and get evidence against this particular runner. So I met up with this guy and agreed to go to this person. We were going to share a purchase. And this guy was completely yellow. So it was clear he had hepatitis C or something. He was an injecting drug user. And hep C is a very common thing amongst problematic heroin users. And shamefully, the UK is not yet on top of hep C. So we decided to go. And then there's this other guy with us who said, I can pay for a taxi to go. And then there's another guy with us. So there's four of us, and we're suddenly going in a taxi. But the guy who was paying for the taxi, sorry, my cat's
That's
getting
so cute.
This is Ebony.
Oh, nice. Hi.
So the guy that was paying for a taxi, I'd seen him before. I know I'd seen him before, and I was looking at him, and he's looking at me, and we'd seen each other before, which is a bit worrying, because the only way I'd have seen him is in a previous operation in a different city. And then I remembered I worked out I'd seen him in Leicester, a job that I'd done like 3 years before, 2.5 years before there. So that was really unnerving. Anyway, we didn't push it, but we were nervous of each other, I think. We got the bag, and then I had to go with the three of them to these disused toilets in the middle of the park in Northampton, in the middle of the racecourse. And there were sort of derelict toilets. Went in there, and they were all injecting. I wasn't. I was waiting for mine to take it away to smoke it. That was my story. So I was waiting for this guy to take his part of the deal. And so the guy I recognised, who was probably from Leicester, he dropped his trousers, went into his groin. But just before that, they'd said, who's got a filter? And they only had 2 filters for 3 injectors. So he said, it's all right, I'll do it without. So I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going into his groin without using a filter. And I'm sort of thinking, well, if he gives himself an embolism from that, he could be dead in like 20 seconds. So I'm thinking, oh my God, he could kill himself here. Then another guy injects into his arm, and then the guy who's got hepatitis, he injects into the back of his hand. And then because he's been in the police custody, he's got no tolerance, so it really hits him. He's the only one who really gouches. He's like, whoa. And he rubs the back of his hand all over his face. So he's got blood all over his face. And I got a bit of dark humour, and I say to him, you've got a little something here, mate. And then another guy says, mate, you've got blood all over your face. And he went, no, have I? And so he tried to wipe it off with his hands. And all he did, because he'd got this yellow face because of the jaundice, he just rubbed it. So he had these varying shades of red and pink and yellow. He didn't get rid of it. It just looked like some kind of, like, gassed or something. Yeah. And so they just sort of ignored it then. And so the 4 of us left, because they wouldn't they said, you can't leave. We all leave together. So when we start walking away, the guy with the blood all over his face is sort of walking in half gouch, half walk, really struggling. And we walked across the park and we parted ways. But I think that event, rather than all the near-death experiences, that event really focused what I needed to do. It was one of those moments in my life, because I thought, I'm seeing these people as prey, as people to manipulate. And these people need help. It's that simple. And I'm not helping them. And yet, I represent a policy which is theoretically to help them by preventing their access to the drug. And yet I'm not preventing their access to the drug, because drug prohibition doesn't work. And so I just thought of all the resources that are invested in me and how much better those resources could be spent, because it doesn't have to be this way. Those people could be looked after. We used to have the British system in this country where if someone developed an addiction with heroin or cocaine, they were given a clean supply to keep them safe from the exploitation of organised crime. That's what we used to do in the UK. And it worked. It worked. We didn't have a problem with organised crime in this country until we banned drugs. We didn't. Organised crime was birthed by drug prohibition. Drug prohibition is what makes organised crime powerful and violent, and it causes the corruption. And we have record drug deaths. It doesn't have to be this way. So I'll never forget that day. Amongst many days, where I've met vulnerable people, likable people, who were just trying to self-medicate for childhood trauma. Because every single person, every person that I've ever met, and I've met a lot, that have been that problematically using heroin or crack cocaine or both, they're all self-medicating for childhood trauma. All of them.
Wow. In all fairness, I was going to ask you, what sort of experience led you to the ideas that you've mentioned in the start of your conversation in terms of, the fault in the system and so on. So I guess this is a good answer to that question. But to, just to explore that a bit more, you've mentioned what was a good practice in the past in order to, to resolve this problem. As an expert and as a person with lots of experience in this field, do you think even in the current state of society, this is a model that can be implemented and that can produce good results? Or do you have another concept in mind that might be the solution to that problem?
No, the solution is, as we used to do, is the British system, although, of course, there are more drugs now. That's what prohibition does. It means there are more drugs, bigger variety. They've never been as cheap and never been as strong and never been as dangerous. That's what prohibition does. So, the answer is to take legal control of the drug markets. For heroin, that means a medicalised model where we prescribe to those people who have a problematic relationship with the drug. Switzerland do that now. The Netherlands do that now. And the killer is that they use British evidence to do that. British evidence. At a point in time in the early 90s where, as I've told you, we invested in more policing, they went in a health approach. And now, as a result, in Switzerland and the Netherlands, they don't have a heroin problem. They don't have these huge heroin deaths that we do. They don't have children dealing heroin in Switzerland because they've taken control of the market. And as a result, the market hardly exists now. Hardly exists. Wow. But cocaine, they're doing an experiment in Switzerland. They're developing an experiment with a legal supply of cocaine as well. So those things are happening. But for the other drugs, it can be either simpler or more complex. So cannabis is quite complicated, although I think it'll be the first one that we take legal control of in the UK. It's quite complicated because you have to decide what model of supply you're going to have. Do you have cannabis social clubs? Do you have a retail outlet? Do you have, what? But you've got to do. I'm a public health advocate, so I would advocate that when we do have a legal cannabis market, when we do, because it will come, that we don't have advertising, we don't have branding, we have clear measures of THC content, CBG content, CBD content, all of those things, so that people are informed. And if they want a weaker balanced product, they can get one, because at the moment most people can only get extremely high strength THC skunk, and that's not good for everybody. So we take legal control of cannabis and we decide the model. The most important thing, of course, is as soon as you take legal control of any drug, you reduce the access to children, because children can get hold of cannabis and cocaine and MDMA now easier than they can tobacco or alcohol.
Wow.
Because dealers don't ask for ID, do they?
Yeah.
And so it's true. You ask any teenager who's going to be honest with you, which is easiest to get, and that's the case. Because prohibition doesn't protect our children. So and for the other drugs like MDMA, the stimulants, and certainly psychedelics, I would have licensed retail, like pharmacies, where you can get the right advice, you can buy it in the right doses with the right advice, and then you would have less harm, less people overdosing, less people dying.
Wow. What such an interesting concept and point. And, and I don't want to, I guess, get too political, but I'm just interested to, to hear just from history perspective. What was the incentive back in the day for the British government to overturn this old British model that worked and to change the approach?
I mean, that's a great historical question, because from the beginning of the 1920s, for decades, there was two opposing political ideologies on drug policy. There was the British system and the American system.
Yeah.
The British system was basically saw addiction as an unfortunate medical condition for which somebody should receive help. Yeah, that's the British system. The American system was that addiction is a moral failing which should be criminalized. And those were two opposing political values across the Atlantic. The British system worked, so we were, psychiatrists that ran it, doctors, we were quite protective of it, and so were politicians. But then World War II happened, and America became the true superpower that it is now. And the reason for that is everyone owed them money. After World War II, that's what made America the superpower. They bankrolled everybody. And they could change the interest rate payments if they didn't like the geopolitical direction of travel. And they were quite ferocious in imposing their moral judgment, international prohibition through the single conventions, which were adopted. The first convention was adopted internationally at the UN in 1961. And Great Britain was a signatory to that. The British system still lasted a few years after that, but it was American pressure that stopped it.
So would you say it's safe to say that the reason this change in systems happened in the first place is the reason why there's small chance for you to adopt this older, better working system right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's... The problem with prohibition is that those are genuinely the reasons why the drugs were banned. Those are genuinely the reasons. Genuinely, the reasons that drugs were banned in the United States was because of racism. So cannabis was banned. They even changed the name from cannabis to marijuana to make it sound more Mexican, because it was a way of persecuting Mexican immigrants who were seen to be competing for white jobs in the Great Depression.
What an interesting fact.
You can see signs like no dogs, no Mexicans, no Spanish-speaking people on shops. Not allowed in shops. It was part of that persecution, and it was about those other people. Those other people competing for jobs. There was no problem with people using cocaine. It was an accepted tonic, family medicine. But when in the Jim Crow era in the southern states, when the southern states were forced to abandon slavery, the wealthy white people in the southern states were constantly looking for ways to maintain their economic power and enslaving power over black people, right? One way that you can enslave black people, because you're allowed to make them work for nothing if they're in prison, is if you find ways to imprison them. And so black people were persecuted for use of cocaine. And so in 1914, the Harrison Act banned it. You've got all these newspaper articles from southern states, because I've researched all this for Drug Wars, my second book. And you've got all these newspaper articles where the most horrifically racist stories, and forgive me for using the phrase, but it doesn't work without telling the phrase, but there's a headline or this quote from a sheriff in 1919 that says, "Them cocaine niggers sure is hard to kill." And it was about increasing this. And, and these sheriffs, these people, they're part of the KKK, right? They're perpetuating this hatred and this myth. And cocaine was banned because of that moral panic about black people using it and becoming superhuman, apparently. So it's always been about racism. Even alcohol prohibition was about racism, because, the biggest funders for alcohol prohibition was the Ku Klux Klan. Why? Because they hated Catholics, and it was about because Protestant political power was under threat, or perceived threat, by Catholic immigrants from Italy and Ireland. It was seen as a way of criminalising Catholic behaviour, because they were seen to be the people who drank more. And if you don't believe me, you can look up the Ku Klux Klan cartoons that at the time, where you've got a picture of the Pope with a bottle of wine, and they're all surrounding the Pope and burning the Pope and things like that. It's always been about persecuting minorities. It's always been about those other people. And that's where our drug laws come from, So basically, international drug prohibition is American domestic racism exported around the world through geopolitical power.
Wow.
And there has never been any evidence. There's never been any evidence submitted in any of these drug laws, about the comparative harms of drugs. Because I'm the geek and because I've written a book on it, I read all of the Hansard discussion for the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971. All of the debates, all of them. And at no point in that debate for the Misuse of Drugs Act in this country was any evidence of harms presented. It was all about the moral judgment and fitting into the single convention, which had been signed 10 years later, which was essentially imposed by the United States.
Wow, that's unreal. That's a completely different perspective on this. That I think it makes such sense. It's so logical, and at the same time, it's so much hidden between the lines. And wow, as a specialist, as an expert in this field, how do you envision the future of this battle with drugs? How do you see society's evolvement into that matter? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic?
Well, I have to be optimistic because I'm an activist.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have some optimism, I wouldn't keep going. I have to keep going. I have to keep going with this struggle, right? But times have changed, and they are changing. So I do advocacy at every level, including at the United Nations. Every year for the past few years, I've organised a side event for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership at the United Nations Committee on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna. So, and in the last 2 years, the politics has really changed in that committee, because at one time it used to be unusual at the CND. You had to have everybody agreeing before any changes could happen. Complete 100% consensus. 2 years ago, the chair of the committee changed those rules and said that they could make a decision on a majority vote, which has drastically changed it, because suddenly change at the highest level is possible. And that vote, the actual vote, was to adopt the words harm reduction into the treaties. So that was a big shift. So things are changing. But if you look around the world, there's lots of countries that have got legal cannabis now. Lots of, even Germany, the biggest economic power in Europe. You got Malta, and things are changing. Psychedelic medicine is being understood. They've legally regulated magic mushrooms and MDMA for medical use in Australia. These changes are coming, and they're coming quite quickly. But we're not moving quick enough in the UK. We're really not. The good thing is that there is a political party. Now, forgive me for being political here. Because I'm a single issue activist, I can't be partisan. Yeah. However, when a political party adopts an evidence-based policy, I've got to point you in that direction. Yeah. So I contributed to, in some small way, to the Green Party drug policy of England and Wales. And then in October, I ran a workshop for the Green Party of Scotland on legal regulation ahead of a vote where they voted to adopt the policy as well. So we now have the Green Party, which is obviously surging in the polls, who have an evidence-based drug policy. And they're the only one with a purely evidence-based drug policy. And obviously, the evidence means that they're recommending legal regulation, that if they got in power, they would legally regulate. And that's what we want. So it's really good. So now the times are changing where a political party is willing to accept the evidence, despite the fact that they will be attacked in the press for it. There will be cheap shots. Even last week in Prime Minister's Questions, just last week, Keir Starmer accused the leader of the Greens in England and Wales, Zach Polanski, of being on drugs. It's just such a cheap shot.
Yeah.
But show me where your evidence for your policy is, Keir. Where's your evidence?
Wow. So during your experience, at what point did you start thinking towards the fault in the concept that you were rendering as a police officer and as a police specialist? Because I imagine that, obviously, as you've mentioned, with these new regulations and these focuses on the police force to battle with drugs, the whole motive and the whole basis on this sort of a science, results-driven approach wasn't really popular. Or was it? Or did it always have some sort of support from certain areas of people and professionals? So how would you describe the dynamic back then when it came to this battle of concepts?
Well, look, if you're talking about policing, it's always easy for a politician to sell the idea that, we've got a problem, we'll just get tougher with it. We'll be tough on drugs. We'll be even tougher than the last politician. Even politicians, they just keep saying we'll get tougher, because it's an easy sell, right? The public are told to be scared. This is something you should be scared of. You've got stupid public information films showing people that this is have you seen the eggs one, smashing the eggs, and this is your brain on drugs. It's just so ludicrous, right? They should play that to children. It's, so you should be terrified of this, and I've got the answer because I can be really tough. I'm going to have more police. I'm going to kick more doors in. I'm going to arrest more vulnerable people, and that will solve it. And the public are reassured. But it's nonsense because there's never any reduction in crime. In fact, there's the opposite. In terms of the drug markets, you get increasing crime. So it's easy to sell the idea. But the great thing, really one of the great things about the UK, and because I speak all over the world, I'm very pleased to be able to say this, that the UK is in a unique position. Because where drug law reform has happened here, it's been led by the police. So police leaders have got really, really fed up about wasted resources that don't have any benefit. And so certain police leaders have created what's called a diversion scheme. So instead of arresting people for small amounts of drugs as possession of drugs and sending them to court, they're diverting them to a drug treatment service provider. So they don't even go into custody. They find them with the drugs and say, no, let's see if you need help. Go and see these experts. And it's freed up police time, freed up court time, and there are better outcomes. People are better because of it. So, but that is being led by the police. Now, what makes it unique in the UK is that there's nowhere else in the world that's happened. Because that's the police effectively, in some areas, decriminalising the possession of drugs in spite of politics, not because of politics. And in fact, in the last government, a Home Secretary, in response to a journalist's question about diversion scheme, all they said was, I expect the police to do their job. And actually, there was a very frosty political response to the police doing this, even though what the police were doing was based on evidence and based on the idea that the police should be reducing harm, not increasing harm. It's just a logical thing, right? Cops should not be making things worse, which is what they are with prohibition. So it gives me some pride, actually, that I can say that around the world. I was speaking in Malaysia not so long ago, spoke to a load of senior police there, and I said, look, because in Malaysia, it's the police that are resistant to the idea of decriminalisation. And I was able to say to them, well, in my country, it's the politicians that are the problem. The police are for it. And that's a very powerful thing to be able to say, and at least I can take some pride from that.
Yeah, I think this speaks about, definitely a higher level of mentality and, society perception, I guess, which is, qualities that you definitely want to have nowadays, I guess, or at least to to know that the force that is behind you have. Wow, that's amazing. Just to get back a little when it comes to your experience on the fields, because I'm really fascinated by the mentality and the different mindsets that you have to adopt and the different things you need to overcome from a mental perspective when doing what you've done. You've mentioned that when you're on the field, you had to spend a lot of time and effort in order to develop your aliases and to be in front of people and to, sort of support the whys that you need to, render in order to be successful. Can you let me know how's that experience in terms of doing it long term and being into this dynamic where you constantly need to adopt almost a different personality and sort of adjust to it? Doesn't that at some point create a problematic conflation of who you are and what you do and what you believe in and, all of these sort of fundamentals?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't have any training for what I did for 3 years. So I was learning, just teaching myself. When the training was brought in, I helped develop that training, and I spent many years training other undercover officers. And what I was taught by a level 1 undercover operative and what I taught other people is that as an undercover officer, you're not an actor. Mm-hmm. And because actors are highly skilled people who can maintain an entirely different, to present themselves as an entirely different person for prolonged periods of time. They can repeat the same act on a play, or they can maintain a certain act for, to develop a film or whatever. Mm-hmm. But we don't have those skills. Mm-hmm. It's different skills entirely. Mm-hmm. So what we have to be is a different version of ourselves and adapt those different versions of ourselves. Because if you try and pretend to be someone that you're not for a prolonged period of time in pressure situations, then the cracks can show. Because if you get suddenly more pressure, you have to question yourself, well, if I've adopted a different persona, how does that person behave in this situation? And then it gets complicated, and different personality traits that you don't want will come out, and you can appear arrogant, or you can not be in control of yourself. So the shifts working undercover have to be really subtle, and they have to be adaptive. And they just have to be a different version of yourself. Now, it can take a bit of teaching to really get people to understand exactly what that means, that you're not an actor. But I suppose what I did, I was a very chameleon-like. I would watch and observe and soak up the behaviour and be a mirror to other people. And in order to fit in, what I did is I used my empathy. And I spent a lot of time trying to learn about other people, trying to understand what their motivations were, what had brought them to this place. And that's how I learned to fit in, is by using empathy, by learning about other people, being interested in other people. And that's when I learned, that you ask a few questions of someone that's not used to being treated with any kindness, and they will tell you their childhood stories. And that's where I learned that every single one of those people had got childhood trauma. I remember speaking to one young woman in Northampton, and she says, I can stop using heroin, and I do, to reduce my tolerance at sometimes, for a couple of weeks at a time. But the trouble is, when I stop using, I remember the feeling of my uncle's fingernails when he used to sexually assault me as a little girl, and I become suicidal. So for her, unlike so many, continuing to use heroin is not a straightforward addiction. It makes emotional sense because it's a way of staying alive because of the level of emotional trauma. And so by learning about those people, I could become quite chameleon-like and fit in. But I was using empathy, and empathy, we always think of empathy as being a positive emotion. but I was weaponizing it. And that's what I see it as now. And when I speak to public audiences, I use that phrase that I was weaponizing empathy. And that's because I was so interested in other people. That's why I became good at what I did.
Wow. Would you say that, utilizing your empathy, obviously, different people have, it's a specter of the levels of empathy you have. But would you say utilizing your basic foundation of it is more matter of, I guess, natural instinct and capacity, or do you think it's something that can be learned, something that you can teach yourself doing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're right that people have different levels of instinct, and different personalities are more in tune with using their empathy. But anybody can develop their empathy. Anybody, I think, other than particularly damaged psychopaths, perhaps, maybe a little bit past beyond but doing that. But anyone can stretch it, and it's like any state of mind, any behavioural pattern is like a muscle. You can learn. You can focus to be interested in other people, and you can take that moment to think, okay, they've told me that. How did that make them feel then? What impact will that have had on them now? What fork in the road did that create for them? What you can almost visualize a point in their life. Well, if that did that to them, what did that mean for their personal development in that direction? What doors did it close for them? Which doors did it open for them? And then you can sort of understand how they've got to being where they are, and really try and get your head round feeling what they're what it would be like to wear their shoes, for want of a better metaphor. Yeah. You can develop your empathy, and it's just time and indulgence, isn't it? It's like, but if, there are lots of geeks out there like me that if we decide we want to understand something as best we can, then we go down that rabbit hole, don't we?
Yeah. Would you say that in the process of you adopting the mindset that you need to have in order to do what you do, was there a particular aspect that you found the most difficult for you to adapt to? Because I can imagine the idea of, let's say, you after a drug dealer or someone that needs to be arrested, but the role and the communication you have with him at some point make you, feel him as a friend, make him sympathetic to you. And then after that, you sort of experience difficulties to harm him, in some way or another. How is that dynamic being overcome or getting used to?
Well, that's the problem. You see, what I did by weaponizing empathy is I set a trap for myself. Yeah. It was a sort of inevitable trap that I would learn to, by understanding people and understanding their backgrounds, I had more sympathy for them, and therefore got to know them better and sometimes liked them more as well. So there's one young man who I manipulated in Nottingham, and I spent loads of time sort of, he was my main target for manipulating. And so I spent a lot of time with him. I went shoplifting with him, did all sorts of things with him, had great fun with him, and he was good company, His particular childhood trauma was the physical abuse he used to have from his father. And I'll never forget the phrase that he used to use was, well, my dad only hit me when I deserved it.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that was his reality. That was the way he saw himself. That was how he valued himself. But the trouble is, I picked him as being the useful person to manipulate because he was on bail for dealing heroin. And so I was witnessing him committing offences on bail. So he ended up being arrested. But the thing is, he wasn't used to someone being kind and listening to him. He'd never had that before. Wow. And so he thought I was his one friend in the world, the first person that he'd ever been able to talk to. Someone who really needed a therapist, and suddenly I was doubling up as a therapist. So when he was in police custody, he ended up being on suicide watch. because that one betrayal from me was the final straw for him, emotionally. Yeah. And when I heard that, it was gut wrenching. Yeah. It was horrendous. Yeah. And actually, I gave up undercover work temporarily at that moment. I was later manipulated myself into going back, but at that moment it was just too much.
Yeah, I just can't imagine the inner battle of conscious versus the objective right thing to do. Is how, like, literally how did you deal with that? How, like,
well, I didn't deal with it. It's why I've got moral injury. Yeah. I didn't deal with it. All of it, I just kept going back and pushing my doubts to one side and keeping going. I didn't realise that all of these instances were causing me mental health harms.
And at what point did you realise that? In how did that happen?
Well, I realised I had to leave the police and do something about the policy problems. I realised that. But when I was coming to those conclusions, I also had a mental health crisis going on. And I didn't really understand what was going on straight away. It took me quite a while to work out that I had PTSD. And then even later to work out that I had moral injury. Because, I've been under the care of 3 psychiatrists, multiple therapists, psychiatric nurses, different doctors. I've had every medication that can be prescribed. I've had different types of therapy. So you learn. I've had these opportunities to learn, and of course I read. I want to understand everything I can about it, and so I do a lot of speaking engagements on mental health as well now. I have a consultancy called OEV Partners where we do lots of mental health advocacy and mental health work. I do lots of speaking. We're doing a lot of work on trying to get psychedelic therapy for police officers. Because I think once we get therapy for police, then public access will come much quicker because public opinion will change, right? Because if the cops are having it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that we're working on. So if anyone out there wants some speaking or to get involved with that kind of work, then just get in touch with me.
Absolutely, and I think this is definitely an initiative that should receive proper awareness because it's, as you've mentioned, it's something that can affect so many different layers and aspects of our society. So I think it's of significant importance.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's a study from 2018 shows that 1 in 5 British cops have got PTSD, some form of PTSD. Half of the rest have got precursor warning signs, like hypervigilance, depression, that kind of thing. There is a mental health crisis in policing. We have 13 years of significant underfunding in police, which means that last year in the UK, for the first time, 50% of serving police have less than 3 years service because of how many years there was sustained no funding. Wow. Now, that just amplifies the mental health crisis because where do you go for the support? Where do you go for your learning and support? And a surprising thing happens. The impact on mental health of that situation can't be exaggerated. It's horrendous. So policing is on its knees. There are more people off sick with mental health problems than physical now. Didn't used to be the case. The retention's going. They're recruiting, but they're losing more cops quicker than they're recruiting. This is not sustainable. And of course, this creates a political crisis. And with all the bad press of what the police have been doing, all sorts of bad things. Think about this: with that many cops with PTSD or moral injury, one thing that PTSD does is it interferes with good decision making. Another thing that it does is it amplifies prejudice. If you're going to be angry about something, you'll be more angry. You're more likely to lose your temper. These are aspects of a mental health condition that we really don't want our police having, because it's not good for the public, it's not good for public confidence, it's not good for the fabric of our society, is it? So you cannot separate the problems that policing has, behavioural problems, even the misogyny, the various aspects of prejudice. You can't separate this from the mental health crisis. You can't. And so these are some of the things that I'm campaigning on, as well as the drug policies.
From your experience, do you see at least some sort of a positive tendency in terms of, police forces and people, working in this area being more open and more aware and more understanding towards the significance of this aspect as opposed to in the past? Because I still assume there's quite the stigma, especially when it comes to police, and moral injuries, as you've mentioned, because I guess in today's society, this is still perceived as a lack of, as a lack of strength and as a lack of power. It's a sign of, weakness. So.
Oh yeah, the stigma is systematic. Yeah. Now I go to many conferences and I speak at many conferences. Certainly there are some really good police leaders who get it, right? But systematically it's still the same. That if you develop a mental health problem in policing, you are treated as the enemy. You are treated with suspicion. That's all. So I'll give you an example. I did OEV Partners, my consultancy, we did an event with the University of Law in Birmingham. We had 17 of the constabularies represented in the audience. We had loads of cops in the audience. One of our speakers teaches police officers in Salford University. And she explained how she got a serious spine injury at work, and she had constant visitors and help from all of her team came to see her, brought flowers, treats, constantly asking how she was. She had a management there, the inspector, chief inspector, all come to see her. Her partner, her wife, who she lives with, developed a mental health injury. No one saw her. No one came to see her. She was ostracised completely. And I recognise that because it happened to me. You are treated as the enemy. It's not just stigma, it's hostility.
Wow.
And yet you're talking about two serious health injuries. That's what it is, a health injury. And it's treated abominably, honestly. Pete, recently, I read only this morning about a cop who committed suicide because he couldn't stand the investigation that was going on when he developed a mental health injury, because he was just investigated, and that's the normal thing. You're investigated. You must have done something wrong.
Jesus.
And, and there's a suicide epidemic with police, and this is adding to the problem, not solving it.
Wow. Such a broad topic. I think at some point I definitely love to have a second part of this conversation, because there's so many aspects I want to explore. And I guess, I'll save this topic for hopefully that moment. But before moving, away from it, I would love for you to talk about your books. I would love for you to talk about how was the decision-making process for you to do these books and to express your thoughts and experience on paper, and how did it feel for you? I mean, because I assume, or rather, you can elaborate on that, but were there some moments that when you were, expressing them on paper, you realized their significance retrospectively? So...
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to do a book, but it just occurred to me it was going to be the best way of getting this information out there. So so my agent put me together with this brilliant man called J.S. Raffaele, who's become one of my closest friends. And he's the writer, so he's the proper wordsmith who basically I told him my story, and he just interrogated me for more detail. He went over and over and over again. He went back over it and back over it. And he says, okay, let's go back. So when you went in there, what colour was the carpet? What did this, and just getting all the detail out of me. Now, like you're suggesting, was it cathartic?
Yeah.
Was it good to get it out? No, it was absolutely horrendous. Wow. It was a horrendous experience because I was just left in a sweating, twitching mess, because my brain didn't want to remember these things. And it was a horrible experience, if I'm honest. And it went on for so long because he always wanted more detail. He went over and over. And all of the details, so much stuff, the details that he got out, he didn't put in the book because one of the most significant skills of a writer, a proper writer, rather than if I'd done it myself, was that he knew what to leave out to make it a more efficient tale, to put it into like a 3-act structure. So there's a lot of stuff that he got out of me that didn't go in the book. But the book is better for that. So I hated the experience of that, but I loved working with JS because we decided to work together to do the history book, which is Drug Wars, about the British system and some of those things that I spoke about. And that was a really good experience, all the people that we interviewed, the work that we did, the research. That was a good experience. I enjoyed Drug Wars, but it's just incredibly hard work developing a book. It's so time consuming, and so we've talked about doing another one. We've got lots of ideas for them. We've even written a script together for a sort of fictional sort of second part of Drug Wars, where to go after that we're pleased with, and we're working with a few people for, but other books, it's just so time consuming, and I'm busy. I've got to keep the speaking going. I've got to keep the advocacy going.
Yeah, and I guess I don't want to give too much of a personal question, but you've mentioned getting these memories out there were difficult. What was a really difficult moment that pops in your head when it comes to that process?
I suppose all of the relationship things, the relationships I formed with the vulnerable people. I suppose those are the difficult things, because the moral injury is the harder aspect, I think, of my mental health condition. And in fact, there was a paper that came out quite recently, which actually suggests from research that moral injury has a greater link to suicidal ideation than PTSD does.
Wow.
Because there's a certain logic to suicide when you're judging yourself by your own values. Because if you're judging yourself by your own values, then the conclusion is that you are worthless. And I've been in that state. I've been in that position where, because you can have that near-death experience or repeated near-death experiences, which is the complex in PTSD. And those can be experiences which are hard to cope with because of that moment of vulnerability and that sense of near death. But the sense of hurting someone else is actually much harder to deal with, because especially if you've hurt someone else contrary to your own ethical centre. Because you're judging oneself is harder to cope with, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answered your question.
It absolutely did, and I'm just curious to hear: is this a problem that you can accept and be in peace with, or is this something that you just learn how to deal with pretty much on a daily basis?
I mean, I mask it, and I do it. I have many really good days. Yeah. I do enjoy life. Yeah. It's just that things can catch me out, and suddenly I'm hypervigilant, or suddenly I'm depressed. It's just I'm up and down. I'm going in the right direction. So yeah, I can deal with it, and I can certainly rationalise it. Intellectually, I understand that this is that that the things I did, I didn't realize at the time. I believed something different, so I can rationalize it perfectly well. But mental health injury isn't rational. That's the point.
Yeah,
it can catch you out. It can catch you out. Suddenly you're behaving contrary to your rational mind would expect. It catches you out. It's an injury.
Absolutely. And I guess to finish off this conversation, sort of when we started talking, obviously we realized that we have a shared passion to music. So I really want to touch on that too. Because, you've expressed your connection to obviously heavy music and, all these sort of bands and this sort of genre. Can you, just tell me a bit more how you got introduced to that and how important, I guess, was, your connection to music when it comes to your experiences, and how did it, wife navigated it with you?
Yeah, I mean, music has been so important to me through my life. It's my escape, my relaxation, and just such a love. And also, it's an emotional leveler, right?
Yeah.
It can really, you can lose yourself in music, and you can deal with emotions much better if you really love and appreciate music. So, I mean, heavy music, I suppose, was the first thing I got onto. The first concert I was taken to at the age of 8 was Beethoven's Fifth. By the Halley Orchestra, who were touring, actually doing a tour. And it was just incredible. And I loved, the Romantics, that heavy, because it's heavy riffs.
It is heavy riffs.
Fantastic.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah, so when I heard Black Sabbath at the age of 9, this was just this was the same thing to me. Sabbath is just incredible. And I just loved it. And then I got into prog.
Yeah.
I particularly fell in love with Yes at the age of 11. To me, that was Yes are the pinnacle. They really are. And so I've just got really into heavy music, and I love all music. I love almost every genre. I think in Good Cop, Bad War, I only really talk about electronic music because it's relevant to the story.
Yeah.
I love electronica, but I've never lost my love of metal. I love progressive metal. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to see Ginger in Manchester.
Oh, wow.
And I adore Ginger. Are just incredible. The way they use jazz and hip hop, and they just smash together all these genres. They are magnificent. Yeah. They really are. But I'll let you into a secret. Actually, I get a lot of requests to do podcasts because I've done lots of podcasts, and so people want. So I can't do them all. And actually, last year I was cutting down on podcasts. But the reason I did yours is because in what you sent me is that you'd interviewed people from Dio and all of these cool people. I absolutely love Dio, White Snake, all of those rock bands. They're just magnificent. And so I thought, well, that's cool. It'd be nice to talk to someone who's into music, because most podcasters that I speak to aren't. But also, it occurred to me that if you've got a metal audience, I've been trying to get more for metal audience, because I do lots of speaking at music festivals, right? But the music festivals where I speak, the predominant music is dance music. Yeah. So you get a lot of people who are already interested and knowledgeable about drug policy because their favourite drug's MDMA and psychedelics rather than alcohol. Now I've personally attended lots of metal festivals, and one that I loved was Sonosphere years ago. I thought it was amazing.
Absolutely.
Oh, it was so good. And I loved it. But the drug of metal is alcohol.
Yeah.
Right? Alcohol is consumed in massive quantities at metal gigs, and especially metal festivals, massive quantities. But what most metal people don't... So metal people don't tend to have an interest in drug policy because their drug's legal.
Yeah, that's true.
But what they probably don't realise that alcohol is the most dangerous of all these drugs. It's the most dangerous to health and society. and the evidence is there is actually comparative evidence that shows that from a study in The Lancet in 2007. Alcohol's the most dangerous drug. But I would love to get invited to a metal festival to speak about drug policy and get some metal people interested and active in this topic, because, you know, what I do love about a metal crowd is that you tend to get a lot of clever people, especially with progressive metal. You get smart people who are friendly and want to know things. You know, that's fair enough.
Absolutely,
that,
it is. Yep.
So it occurs to me, you know, that's the reason why I said yes, let's do this podcast.
Well,
I hope you don't mind that being the reason.
Oh, no, at all. I'm actually very glad that, you know, whatever the reason is, I really appreciate that, you know, you're interested in doing it. And, you know, to double down on what you've mentioned, I think this is such a fair point, because, as you've mentioned, the metal audience is such an interesting demographic group. As you've mentioned, these are intelligent, open-minded people. I'd say quite introverted to an extent, so they're very, you know, close groups oriented, and it's, unless you are within this specific audience circle, it's very difficult to reach them, if this makes sense, you know. So I do think that your mission is so well targeted, and it makes such a great sense, and I think, especially in metal, it's interesting because, you know, alcohol is sort of part of the whole war, right? It's part of the culture in a way. Which, you know, it's very interesting, because I've been backstage to so many shows, and I know so many bands, and usually most of them don't drink an ounce of alcohol, you know? So it's which obviously makes sense when it comes to what we've been discussing here. But I completely agree that it's a topic that deserves raising awareness.
When I used to perform, because I've always sung, so I've sung in metal.
Oh,
bands.
Amazing!
I've sung jazz. I've sung all sorts of stuff. But I love metal most. I love singing metal more than anything else. I mean, the last band I was in was just a rock covers band, but which is great fun to do parties, pub parties, those kind of things, and getting people dancing and things. But I was always trying to persuade them to go that little bit more metal. And we did a Metallica tune. Actually, one of the most fun songs I did with that band was The Time Warp.
Oh, nice, yeah.
Because you can really rock it up.
Yeah.
You can really scream and really, really give it some. And it's very entertaining getting a whole group of people dancing The Time Warp in front of you. It's such a feeling of power. It's hilarious.
Yeah. It's so interesting, it's something that I've been discussing with so many musicians. I think one of the most fascinating experiences and emotions that a person can, feel is being on stage, and particularly when it comes to music too. I don't know. It's just enchanting, isn't it? It's I don't know how to even describe it. It's insane.
Yeah, it's incredible. It is, because it's a connection with people. It's that emotional connection. If you love music like we do, and you've always loved that, to be able, that feeling of to be able to actually perform to a point where the audience is connecting emotionally with what you're doing, there's nothing like it at all. I mean, I miss it really, but as soon as drug policy took over my life, I had no time for music anymore, so I don't perform anymore. Because you've got to put the effort in. You've got to work with a band and practice, and in order to feel like you can do it properly, you've got to reach that sweet spot with the musicians you're working with, right? You've got to feel like you one unit. You have to feel that
it's
way.
Just the synergy between you when you create music is something so unifying. It's amazing. Amazing. So last question, just to cap it off. If you had to choose what advice would you give people in terms of what music they should listen to while reading your book? What's the best soundtrack to reading your book?
God. Well, to my first book, there's a lot of emphasis on, because I did a lot of club stuff as well. There is a lot of emphasis on the dance music in the first sort of quarter of the book. So, I don't know. I find that a lot of people who like progressive metal, who also like dance music, their favourite dance music is Orbital. Yeah. Because Orbital is so heady, right? It's so progressive and so thought-provoking. Correct. And to me, it hits some of the same sweet spots. It's some of the same, some of the. So I'd say Orbital, maybe. But then later on, in the later chapters, maybe the earlier heavy albums of Opeth.
Oh, what a great choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love Opeth. They
Absolutely.
I've seen them many times.
Probably one of the most beautiful gigs I've been to was Opeth at an amphitheater. It was just, out of this world experience. Absolutely amazing.
Which theatre was that?
That was actually in Bulgaria. So that was in Plovdiv.
Oh, in Bulgaria. Okay,
yeah.
Right.
It was.
Yeah, I saw them in the Royal Albert Hall.
Wow!
As well, I saw that gig.
That's a big one.
That was an amazing.
That's
gig.
a big one.
It really was. Yeah.
What was the best concert you've attended? Just last question.
Oh God, I've seen so many. I mean, the thing is, if you ask me on a different day, I might say a different band. I think I saw Yes at Glastonbury. Wow. I think that was in 2003, and it was, one of the earliest lineups. It was, and if they'd asked me to write down the set list I wanted, it would have ended up being what they played. They played for 3 hours and 15 minutes
insane.
at Glastonbury.
That's insane.
It was just. I mean, it was magical. It really was. But I don't know what else. Chemical Brothers.
Nice.
A couple of their gigs have been just. Wow.
Yeah.
EST.
Ooh.
The S4 Svensson trio.
Yeah. That's that.
The Swedish jazz masters. They were that. In terms of goosebumps and spine tingles and just incredible.
Wow. What a great selection. Okay. Yeah, I think that's, such a great finish to this incredible conversation. Thank you so much for, sharing your knowledge and being so open to all the topics we've discussed. It was, without any exaggeration, for me, it was eye-opening, and I hope it would, affect, every person that is listening to that in the same manner. Where can people buy your books?
All good bookshops.
Amazing.
Wherever they want to buy them, really. But
awesome.
And if anyone wants any needs any work on mental health or public speaking on any of the topics, I do that. I do university lectures, all sorts of different venues. Yeah. If you invite me, I'll come.
I will put relevant information in the description. So everyone interested can check it out there. Okay, amazing. Neil, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing experience. So thank you for, giving me the chance to make this happen. And it was amazing.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm sure we'll speak again.
I really hope so. And my last question, actually, is there any way I can order your books with a signature of some sort? Because I would love to, have this as part of my memorabilia somehow.
Just message me an address.
Thank you so much.
I can sign them and send you.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Have a great evening and talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye.